My name is Jørgen Ingård Petersen. I am chairman for this session here. And we have welcome the committee. That's Jarek Cieślarek or such a thing. I think it's Polish. Jarek is not Polish. From University of Warwick in England, and then we have Jens Ole Laursen from regions South in Denmark and Sønderborg, and finally we have the chairman Jesper Larsen from the department. And then naturally we have our main person, Christian Michel Sørup. You have forgotten Michel here.
Yeah, sorry about that.
And the process will now be that Christian, he has 45 minutes to present the results from his PhD thesis. Then we have a short break, 7-8 minutes, and then the committee will start up. And Jarek will start up. And then maybe some committees from Jesper and Jens Ole, and then also other comments from you. And it will take maximum 4 hours, 3 hours, until 4 o'clock. Until 4 o'clock. And after the committee, it's possible for you to say, give some comments. If you are a PhD student, you also recommend that you think about how you present your critique. There will come another day maybe. But we will start out now, and I will give the floor to Christian.
Thank you, Jørgen. Thank you all for coming. I'm really delighted to greet you all to my special day. I will make this as entertaining and as interesting as I possibly can, and it shouldn't be that difficult for me because we have a very interesting topic to talk about, namely my PhD project. I've been working on it for 3 years, and it concerns the development of a generic performance measurement framework tailored for use in the emergency departments. So let's dive right into it. The outline of today, there's no real surprises here. Start by setting the frame here, dealing with healthcare and especially, of course, the emergency department, what is going on with acute care delivery for the moment. That brings us to the motivation of the project. Why is this so important today and why is it interesting, useful? That brings us to the research questions, formalize these questions. One major question, which has been divided into 3 subsequent sub-questions. And those are going to be answered in the next bullet, being the research design part. I'm going to touch briefly upon the philosophical frame, or the philosophical viewpoint, which has to do with how to interpret the conclusions that I've come up with, and how to really read the report, and then one by one I answer each of the research questions. Then the discussion, what could be done differently, what to be aware of, some future research points, and that would possibly take some 45 minutes. So, you can talk a lot about healthcare and what has been going on for the, what has had an impact on the acute care delivery, but looking at the population today, we see that people are increasingly getting older, and moreover, they suffer from more chronic diseases more than ever. And therefore, there's an increasing demand for acute care services, which puts a high requirement on the emergency departments. Taking a different perspective, society increasingly wants better healthcare at lower costs. And there we have other projects here at DTU that deals with technology advancements, how to exploit those opportunities. We had a lot of lean initiatives, so on and so forth, in order to meet these different requirements. Looking at the healthcare reform here in Denmark, not just in Denmark, but in global terms, we see a tendency towards centralization of healthcare services. In Denmark, we're going from fewer hospitals to larger ones where we assemble all the different specialties, and these larger hospitals are the ones that provide acute care. Furthermore, there's a tendency to lower the amount of inpatient beds. There are many different reasons for it. One point being driving down costs. And another thing is that patients prefer to be treated completely and then come back home immediately or as soon as possible without getting admitted. So you see, this is kind of the tendencies that we see today. Now, putting this on sort of a seesaw, we have on one hand side the national healthcare reform and then the demographics. This is the main challenge that we see fewer inpatient hospitals, just as I said. On one hand side, lower capacity, but patients really require more services. They get older, they see there are more exacerbations, that is, get treated, but they need services once again. So this is kind of the main challenge. How do we secure the quality and efficiency in our healthcare system? That brings us to the motivation part. Of course, we're doing a lot of different stuff in the emergency departments today. One major point is that the former emergency department has been reconceptualized into what is now known as a FAM, in Danish, a fælles akutmodtagelse. Has many different names, but the concept covers the former urgent care unit, the former emergency department, and then observational unit, all under one umbrella term, one unit, which will be the main entrance for acute care patients or acute patients. Now, the processes are being done differently. We're trying different initiatives in the emergency departments. Some of them listed here. The triage, which is a rough categorization of patients so that you gain the overview of which patients should be seen first. So that is according to severity. Here in Denmark, we use the DEPT triage protocol. There are different to choose from. Then the early senior involvement to get the highly qualified or the experienced physician to see the patients as soon as possible to limit the length of stay. Standardized patient procedures as well. Typically, acute patients, they present themselves based on symptoms rather than a prior diagnosis. So based on these symptoms, we launched a kind of package solution of different treatment services. And lastly, but not least, the emergency medicine as a separate specialty. Some 60 European countries already have this. It may just come to Denmark eventually. However, what is missing here is the ability to track the effects of all these different initiatives. Are we doing things right? Are we improving performance? Are we actually worsening by launching these? That is the main driver for my project. And that's what I've been dealing with for the past 3 years. The research questions are listed up here. The major one, I'll look at these different effects and I'll try to conceptualize this in a performance measurement model. That's my final proposition. The 3 sub-questions takes me through all this, take me through this journey. Started out by looking at which measures to include. We wanted a limited number of performance measures that could provide a comprehensive picture of how the emergency department is performing. Next up, and this is where I really used a lot of time, investigating the connectivity between these performance measures. So launching a particular initiative, how does it impact the ED, emergency department, as a system? And finally, putting all this knowledge that I've acquired, putting that into practical use by suggesting this performance measurement framework and visualizing all the data trends. Main idea, and also the research effort can be quite difficult to read. I'm sorry about that. But on the left-hand side, the cylinder, this is where you have the data repository of the clinical databases, various databases at the hospital. The way that decision-making process today, how that is made, that is by following the bottom line here. You extract data selectively from this data repository, and with little or no prior data mining effort, this is your basis for making your decisions today. And of course that can be improved, and this is my particular work, choosing the upper path, where I choose several performance measures, acquire the data, filter it, clean it, process it, so that you can actually work with it. Then looking at the connectivity, I did 3 attempts in total, using basic statistics, then more advanced statistics, the structural equation modeling, and finally computer simulation being system dynamics. Again, altering this into a decision support or performance measurement framework, and this provides the basis for making improved decisions. Moving on to the research design. Like the tradition for operation management research is that you touch upon the philosophical angle, because this will guide the reader of the thesis, or the listeners, you, to understand how I perceive the world, how I have come up with the conclusions, and which tools that are kind of in my toolbox, and how to use those. A lot can be said about critical realism, which is my personal choice, and with a special angle of systems thinking, which has to do with underlying mechanisms. A critical realist acknowledges that there's a big world where everything happens, of course, and within this world there are particular events that are happening. Some we can see, some we cannot see. That is within the real domain, that's the world. Actual domain, this is where the events happen, or can happen. And finally, the empirical domain is what we can measure. Some of which we do measure, some of what we do not measure, but have the ability to. Critical realists also emphasizes that you should use both qualitative methods and quantitative methods in order to gain this, or come up with comprehensive solutions to a particular problem. So this is where the research question really determines which of these tools to use, both from the quantitative side and the qualitative side. Research question number 1, which performance measures to choose? We identified a literature gap in this situation. Any PhD really starts with a thorough literature review to gain insights into this particular topic. I was no different. What we identified was that talking about which performance measures should be used was like talking religion. There's plenty of different opinions on what performance measure to use, the level of abstraction, and so on and so forth. Plenty of meta-studies out there have been choosing various studies and highlighted performance measures, presented these. So our contribution was a meta-study of meta-studies, and that became the first journal article in my PhD. The technique that I used was a systematic literature review, which looks like this, something called PRISMA guidelines, which is a thorough, you could say, recipe on how to do a systematic literature review. Followed that protocol, and based on specific search strings, I came up with a total of 1,314 articles. That I didn't read them all, but I read the titles and the abstracts. Could this have to do? Did it have something valuable to contribute to my my research here came through a screening process, and finally the inclusion-exclusion criteria stated explicitly in the article, and I ended up with a total of 14 articles which provided the basis for my framework. The framework was put in a hierarchy based on Andreas Traberg, a former PhD of ours, based on his categorization. So relate each measure to either patients, employees, or operations. So the main learning points was that I had now a pool of indicators that could give us something valuable to say about the emergency department performance. Categorization, as I said, according to the Traberg categorization. What became apparent was that there was a lack of employee-relevant measures. That could have to do with the studies being conducted in the US, Canada, Australia. So the research team agreed that we should include more employee-related measures so that it became useful here in Denmark due to our culture. So the backbone, or the spine of the framework, was now in place, and I could continue to research question number 2. As I said, I used a lot of time on this particular part, so I have a total of 2 published journal papers on this matter, and the 4th one, when I handed in my thesis, it was just submitted. Now it has been conditionally accepted. We're doing the revisions already. Research question number 2, investigate the connectivity. There are plenty of researchers out there who investigate the same matter in different domains, different topics. There is no definite solution to how this can be done, but I did 3 attempts, and I'll show you these. First attempt was to look into the structure of just one particular indicator, and I could choose freely from whichever indicator I'd like to. I chose a very complex one, being related to the employees, namely what is driving employee absence or sickness absence. And as I told you about the philosophical angle, use qualitative and quantitative techniques to gain the full understanding. I started out by once more doing a literature study, which factors have direct influence on sickness absence, try to map these. I found plenty, no surprise. Next up, can we actually confirm these hypotheses in a quantitative way? I did that by doing hypothesis testing one independent variable upon a dependent variable, which of course becomes the sickness absence rates, to see if these comply. In the end, I had like just a short handful or small handful of indicators that had to do with sickness absence, being a construct called social capital, that is the employees' perception of fairness, reliance, and cooperation, and then a few measures that have to do with general contentment. I'll show you that. These conclusions were also into a decision support tool, which I have imported into my final framework. This is the add-on, so to speak. It consists of it automatically is supposed to extract scores from various employee satisfaction survey questions, and it automatically calculates a particular color code that corresponds to the danger of seeing increasing sickness absence rates in a healthcare department. So intuitively, I use the traffic lights, symbols, green being we're fine here, yellow is a warning sign, we could be approaching problems here, and red ones require immediate attention. The final one is called the employee absence diamond. It's just a tool for dialogue, so if say that the ED decision maker has morning meetings or would like to communicate a particular problem with sickness absence, he or she can use this one to start the dialogue, really, and see where does it really hurt. What I learned was that hypothesis testing, the basics isn't really that strong. You assume that data has a particular distribution. You assume that data is without measurement errors. A lot of crude assumptions in this matter. So, but I really had no other option if I wanted to investigate this issue. So what I figured was that if I had a larger sample, then it would allow me to do more advanced stuff. The next attempt that I did, second, that's going to be the third journal paper, is more advanced. Again, it's statistics. I used something called structural equation modeling, no longer on a particular or a single indicator, but I took a broader perspective, so looking at patient satisfaction. Again, a very complex matter. Now, structural equation modeling, for those of you who do not know what that is, again, it's statistics. It's an umbrella term that covers path analysis, factor analysis, and structural equation modeling. Those three, not structural equation, multiple regression, sorry. Those three are all covered under structural equation modeling. And the strength of doing this is that you can test more hypotheses in one big model. You can use mediating and moderating variables, and it even accounts for measurement error. It's, in brief, a lot more powerful compared to what I did previously. Furthermore, I have the option to model latent construct. A latent construct is something that you cannot measure directly. So this could be something that has to do with emotions like intelligence or stress levels or patient satisfaction for that matter. The final analysis, it yields these regression coefficients as the final result, and I get these with a particular level of statistical significance. Thus, I'm testing these causal links, and I even get the magnitude, so that is the power of the relations. Are these strong or are these very weak? However, doing such a model requires not just a larger sample, it requires a lot larger. So I considered to set up a questionnaire. And doing a questionnaire is no easy matter because it has to be rigid, has to have particular levels of validity. So are you asking the right things? Do people understand what you're asking? So on and so forth. But sometimes even a PhD student can get lucky, and the solution came knocking on my door, and I could really just pick this report. It was published just after I had these concerns. Major patient satisfaction survey involving 1,940 patients, only in the emergency departments and even in the capital region of Denmark. I immediately called the unit of patient perceived quality, those that did the survey, and requested the data material so that I could work with this and they could get credited in a subsequent article. And they agreed, and the rest is history. So now I had the empirical material in place, and that limited what I could test of hypotheses. I tested a total of 4 hypotheses, which deals with the patient's perceived or satisfaction with waiting times, information delivery, a little bit of peculiar construct, which I named infrastructure, which deals with signposting. Can people actually find their way to the emergency department? And can the patient, does he have the ability to park his car nearby? I could use them, so why not? And it was even in the literature as well. Now the basic steps is that you take your hypothesis from literature and you do your questionnaire afterwards to gain the data yourself. Of course, I flipped steps 1 and 2 in this case. Next up, you run a confirmatory factor analysis to see if your data supports your hypothesis in a sufficient manner. That is, I calculate a number of statistical figures that all have to be within particular ranges. They complied, so I can continue to the next step, where I I obtain my regression coefficients. I'm not quite done yet because I need to compare my baseline model to other competing models that could fit the data equally well. And having done so, I choose the best model, and that's the one I report in my journal paper. Looks like this. It looks so shallow when I present it like this, but it's quite the journey to get there. All my hypotheses were positive, and the regression coefficients were the same, also positive numbers. 3 out of 4 were of statistical significance. So I could not say that I could not disregard these literature conclusions. On the contrary, my study supported those conclusions. Now I've shown you that it was definitely possible to test these hypotheses in a more rigorous way, more hypotheses, one model. There are very high requirements on these statistical figures because the experts claim that these threshold limits are it's getting tighter and tighter because there are too much getting published that doesn't really have the proper value. And then finally, which is the most important thing, could I apply this particular technique to the rest of the performance measures that I have? And I realized that's just not possible because I have a heterogeneous matter of measures and have time intervals, head counts, and then questionnaire items. I need to rethink my strategy here. And I had the opportunity to do so while I was on my way to Boston, Massachusetts, where I worked for 6.5 months in an emergency department at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center. It was quite the experience, not only work-wise, but also it was just a great experience, really. You see that the Red Sox even won that year, the World Championship, the first time for some 40 years. Everybody were happy, and so was I. Now back to work. All my considerations, I was still working on analyzing these relationships. Furthermore, now I had Beth Israel to be concerned about. I have to really provide value to them as well. I hadn't forgotten about the philosophical view, so still thinking about systems thinking and critical realism. So my immediate thought was to stick with statistics for an exploratory purpose. However, I found out that computer simulation was really the way to go here in my case. So I used something called system dynamics. System dynamics is a particular type of computer simulation that can be used on highly complex social constructs, and the emergency department is definitely very complex. There are different techniques within computer simulation, and the main differentiator is the focus on feedback mechanisms. So you impact your system, one particular place, an array of different mechanisms are initiated, and it always comes back to the point where you initiated your change. Now, the general approach of doing such a simulation model is that you define your problem in a dynamical way. So quantities, they vary over time. You map the process. Usually you do that in a qualitative way. You ask the experts on the given process, the experts being the ones that actually work in the emergency department every day. And then you model it in an analytical way and set it up in a computer simulation software. You test the model to see if it can replicate historical data in an adequate way. And furthermore, this is not just enough. You have to stress it through extreme tests to see if the behavior is still within what we perceive as being reality. When that is done, then you can start playing with the model. Not playing, but testing different policy implications. And this is something that definitely had the interests at Beth Israel. So we needed a problem that I could model, something that not just is relevant for Beth Israel, but also for other emergency departments, which is the problem of crowding. You have the definition up here. And what becomes apparent, hopefully for all of you, is that we have a demand and supply mismatch. We simply have an inflow of patients which exceeds the outflow. And when that happens, that is when patients pile up in the ED, and there you have the problem. Quality deteriorates, treatment is worsening, all that. This is a major problem. Now, for Beth Israel, the case is that they have a particular policy. And this policy, if this is activated, is a kind of a help protocol, which can be initiated when the ED experiences crowding. In practice, what happens is if you initiate this, you send a signal to other inpatient wards, and these are immediately notified that the ED is now under pressure. We have to do something in order to help them. And they do this by either discharging patients slightly faster compared to what is normal practice, or they relocate patients in order to ease the patient flow. Now, this protocol can be initiated when these three criteria are met. First of all, ED census being the total amount of patients in the ED. If that exceeds 54 patients, criterion 1 is met. ED borders, those are the patients that have been treated completely and are just waiting to be transferred to an inpatient ward. That exceeds 10, then you have criteria number 2, and those have to be met for 2 consecutive hours. That's when the button lights up and you can alert everybody else. Now, the simulation model. A system dynamics model consists of 2 main components. It consists of stocks and flows. This is similar to a bathtub, really. You have the stock being the bathtub, you have the inflow being the faucet, outflow being the drain. So that's pretty simple. What you see here is the whole ED patient flow, and what you should really take note of is the 2 feedback loops that are, it's difficult to see, but you have a balancing feedback loop up here, which is a natural constraint of how many patients you can admit. And then you have the upper loop up here, a reinforcing loop, which is the patients that return to the emergency department. As I said before, if you activate the protocol, it comes at a cost, which is that patients get discharged faster, and literature supports that these patients are more prone to coming back and requiring services once more. This can cause oscillations in the amount of patients that go through the emergency department. Those are the dynamics we wanted to investigate. Furthermore, we included a parallel inflow of elective patients, those that are scheduled for surgeries, because they are in direct competition against the ED patients that also require admission. So there's a competition there. Now, the main learning points was that with this particular simulation technique, I had created a learning platform in which Beth Israel could test different trigger levels to see the impact on the whole patient flow here. And the main take-home lesson was that using the knowledge that the employees possess and combining that knowledge with computational power, such as simulation, this is really a powerful tool. Furthermore, it was a very wise decision to take away my, you could say, narrow focus on performance measures only, to really understand the underlying processes of which these performance indicators they reflect. Because when you do that, then you really understand your system, and that's when you can launch interventions, and maybe you even know what will happen in the future when you do so. Key point, exploit the employee's knowledge. And that's what I did when I did my third research question, setting up the final performance measurement model. I did some 39 interviews, evenly distributed at the 3 cases included in the thesis, to link the different processes, link the different indicators. And I mapped those in a guided user interface, which have been shown a few pictures in the thesis, and maybe it doesn't really give you the real picture. So now I'm actually going to quit my presentation and show you how it works. It's just a prototype, but I'm pretty sure you'll get the hang of it pretty fast. This is the main menu. It consists of course, the main tab being the performance measurement overview, and there are 3 supportive tabs. I'm only going to show one tab. I'm going to do that in a minute. You have the SPC, the Statistical Process Control Chart Selection Guide. This is to help the user understand which of these control charts should be used for particular performance measures according to what scale they're measured in, how large the sample is. Next tab, this one, measurement definitions. Of course, there are different definitions used. Let me just click anyways. First column, the category. Second, the cluster, safety and satisfaction. Let's just start with that one. You have a potential responsible for picking up the data. Then the observed variable name, the explanation to what you're actually measuring here, what data should support the measure, or which database to apply, the international definition, if that differs between what is defined at the hospital, which scale is measured in, and finally, which diagram to use. Going back to the main menu, the underlying measurement network is where I mapped all the different hypotheses. You can see for each observed variable, it's connected to another performance measure identified during the interviews. Of course, you get a drop-down list. It connects to a bunch of different measures, and each connection is supported by a hypothesis stated in a narrative. Now, the performance measurement overview is what the decision maker could use to gain a quick overview of how the ED is performing. And as you can see, not all of these measures are with shortcuts, and that's just because I couldn't find data on all of these. But you can click on each shortcut, and you gain a somewhat similar chart like this. This is an SPC chart. It plots the raw data with a mean and 3 sigma limits, being the upper control limit and lower control limit. Those are the ones, if you either exceed or go below these particular sigma limits, it notifies the user that something statistically significant is different in this particular process. What is quite novel in this model is that if you see these changes in your model, you can find your explanation in the column out here. Each of the measures have a similar column. So this particular indicator we're looking at is the left without being seen rate. So patients that enter the ED get registered, but for some reason or the other decide to leave before treatment has been completed. That can be explained by any of these measures out here, and is supported furthermore by a piece of text saying what the result was this particular month. If we had problems that could not be measured, this is where to search for your explanation. Going back to the presentation. The discussion part now. When talking about what to measure, this is of course a subjective matter. It cannot be objective, so it's a matter of opinions and has to correspond to whatever strategy is relevant for either the hospital or the emergency department. Another thing to consider is the level of abstraction. If you use many performance measures, you gain a very detailed overview of your emergency department, but it comes at the expense of losing overview. However, if you have too few, you don't see the entire picture, but you gain the overview very quickly. Another concern, should we include patient-specific measures, such as patients like sepsis patients, acute myocardial infarction, asthma, pneumonia, larger groups? These indicators would be clinical indicators and could provide even more value for the ED decision maker on how the performance is. Furthermore, the definitions, they vary a lot. So when definitions vary, you lose the ability to compare both within the hospital, compare performance over time, but also externally between hospitals. How the measures connect, there are plenty of pitfalls in this matter, and many of which are listed here. If you see, you start by, on the left-hand side, you launch your intervention, or a particular action, and you want to measure the effect on the far right-hand side in a particular performance measure. We don't have time to go through all of these, but just emphasize two of these being the confounding variables, a very important one. So we hypothesize that action X has a direct impact on factor Y. If we see that this is actually true, this could be due to a confounding variable that moderates the effects here. So it's kind of a volume button, so to speak. Another important thing is the time delays. So if you launch your intervention, there may be a delay of, could be an hour, a week, a day. We just don't know when you see the effects. These are issues that that you need to be aware of when you do the different analysis. And each of the techniques that are applied have its pros and cons. You cannot take all into account in one final complete solution. Now the research question number 3, when I set up the performance measurement model, I would like to underline that I'm no system developer. You should probably leave that task to someone else, or maybe I need to work more on that part. User friendliness and system requirements, all that jazz. I'll consider that in my continuous work. Another thing is, if we see an effect, how can we be sure that the intervention was actually what that caused it? So I need to do more work in this regard, identifying the time delays and the magnitudes somehow. I have no concluding answer to that matter. Let's say that we would like to implement this product at the emergency department. There are some things that you should be aware of, which are listed here. 3 important elements. The infrastructure, which is the data repository, has to support easy extraction. Could be still within these 5 or various clinical databases, or it could be one common pool. Doesn't matter, as long as it's easy to extract. Another thing that you should be aware of is the political, like the pitch of the model. You shouldn't go out there as a decision maker and say, we have this great performance monitoring control tool, because the employees will immediately say, oh, this could be used as a whip or for scapegoating. I'm really just saying this is paramount for the success of this measurement tool. And finally, keep using the model if it becomes implemented, because in that way it will be updated and of real value to the customer. If I had more time, which unfortunately I don't, then I would look into the data validity question, because with any model, the saying goes, garbage in, garbage out. My model is no exception here. So high quality data as input material will provide the best or the most precise estimates as possible. Furthermore, the question of including patient-specific indicators should be exploited also. This could be added as sub-modules to the proposition that I did here. Where to start is a good question. That would probably have to be considered in collaboration with the ED decision makers. And then the personal recommendation is to look more into the possibilities of these simulation techniques. Not just system dynamics, it could be discrete event simulations also, it could be a combination of the two, but simulation really yields great understanding of system performance, a great opportunity for future PhD students. Those are the immediate ones that I would consider. Another thing would be the financial aspect. I haven't forgotten about it. I didn't really use much time and energy on it. But the entire value of treatment usually is put on the rough equation being value equals quality over costs. If you get the cost side included of all the treatment services, then you can say something qualified of the value provided. Finally, final remark is on the continuity of care. I've looked at the emergency department in isolation. If you look at the quality provided throughout all of the health services, you need to extend this boundary, maybe to include just another chunk. Could be the pre-hospital sector, ambulance services, or it could be the intra-hospital or the other inpatient wards as well. Thereby you gain even better understanding of the hospital as a system. Right on time. That's it for now. I'm going to give it over to Jan. If you have some final remarks, then it's your turn.
You need some minutes?
I don't need any more minutes. No, I'm actually done.
Then we'll stop.
Yeah, we'll stop here, and there's going to be a short break of some 15 minutes.
About 7-8 minutes.
7-8 minutes. 7-8 minutes it is.
In those days, there were people smoking and it took 7 minutes.
Shorter break than it is.
So,
Thanks for listening, everybody. Break.
Christian said, now time for your questions. So I'll give the word to Erik.
Thank you very much. Right now, fun starts, yeah? I think just maybe as an introduction, actually, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah, I hear you loud and clear.
My background is actually industrial engineering, using US terminology. So I'm more from Midwest, spent 20 years working manufacturing and healthcare, just to give you a little bit of background. And then in UK, last 5 years. So understanding a little bit or learning Europe, how it works, which is quite different comparing these two systems. So right now, from healthcare point of view, is also quite different. So this will be one of the questions also, how do you link these two systems together? But before we start, you have done a lot of work, actually, and you have quite a number of papers. So this is very commendable, actually, from point of view of productivity and from point of view of results that you're obtaining. And it looks like you really work very hard to get all of these results. Sure. So I use this opportunity to ask questions which try to kind of probe some of these areas. So it's more as a discussion than actually questioning answer. That's actually my kind of, just to clarify. So starting from beginning, let's say, you are doing it because of this new initiative, which is in Denmark right now in healthcare, called FAM, introduction. So question is, this FAM was created not a long time ago, it's still in process. Can you explain, perhaps for me as a background, what is the logic behind FAM? And maybe since we are discussing the background as a strategist in your dissertations, can you kind of go through 1980s, as you said, and look through this different transformation and provides logic for introducing the FAM as a new concept. So what's the mechanism for that? And use a historical development and transformation from 1980s. Yeah, I'm using your dissertation because you are talking about it.
That's right. Well, actually, my point of departure, really, when it comes to the conceptualization of these new emergency departments, I started here in Denmark when it was first described in 2007, really. Of course, the concept wasn't invented here in Denmark. We have found inspiration elsewhere. For instance, in Boston, where I was, the whole concept of the emergency department being the main entrance for acute patients had been there for some 20 years, I think. Like the reason for structuring it differently is due to some of the challenges. You see that fewer hospitals, and of course when you have fewer hospitals, patients, the load of patients will increase. And it will increase with, at least here in Denmark, as I wrote, with 200 to 400,000 patients per year. Of course, when you have such an amount of patients coming in, you need to think differently in terms of organization. So restructuring things, and in order to ease the patient flow, still with quality in treatment and efficiency in treatment, have that in mind as well. So, yeah, let's continue.
So motivation for AFM is what? What is the motivation for having FAM introduced?
It is to streamline the patient flows, really, because I cannot say a particular year where it changed really, but we had more smaller greeting receptions for each inpatient ward. So there are many different entrances to the hospital, also for acute care patients. And if you have that, then it becomes kind of intangible. It becomes difficult to manage, compared to having a main entrance, one flow, and from there it getting distributed to elsewhere in the hospital.
As you mentioned, there is a number of places which has a front door, one door entry to the hospital. For example, US have, and I don't know exactly the Boston area, but let's say UK has as well. And both countries suffer quite a lot, struggle with this problem of scale. They don't know how to utilize the scale of increase of the patients. They are getting overcrowding. So at one level you're getting basically the scale, taking advantages, but there's overcrowding. So how to handle this, yeah, from beginning? I'm starting this as a background question first, just before we go to your work. This is your motivation for your dissertation.
Very relevant question, and if I could answer that to perfection, then healthcare problems would dissolve, really. But in my simulation model, we tried to simulate this behavior. And what I identified was the main bottleneck was the between the borders between departments. So transferring patients out of the emergency department and getting them transferred to the correct inpatient wards. If this does not happen fast enough, you create a bottleneck, and so you slow down the whole patient flow, and you see crowding as a symptom in the emergency department. Of course, it's a hospital-sized problem here. So dealing with patient flow, streamlining the patient flows.
Okay, motivation for FAM is not your problem. Yeah, you try to help. Basically, somebody else did this job for you. Well, not for you, but for the country, I guess. Yeah. But question. Okay, so right now, if I understand FAM to the degree which I can ask some questions, let's say you have a 112 number, you have a 1813 number. Yeah. Then you have ambulance also possible, which is from 112 to 1813.
That's right.
And then basically you have an emergency. Sorry, you start from GPs. Yeah. So you have GPs 112 or 1813, ambulance coming from any of these numbers, and and then you have basically the emergency department. So which problems are you solving from point of view performance? Yeah, because from point of view of right now ED is affected is a chain which is quite connected together, starting from GPs and going until the ED, yeah? So going to the front door of ED hospital. So which performance, what performance measure, just to clarify the scope right now of your work.
Yeah.
So what performance measure are you addressing?
Only within the emergency department. I don't regard any of the different transportation or what's that called, referrals from GPs or wherever they come. I see them as one pool of patients coming through the main entrance. All the performance indicators have to do with the emergency department in isolation, their performance only. Of course, there are some descriptive factors also. So it's external factors that can possibly explain the behavior that you see, such as the patient load is included, of course. It can explain a lot because more patients, more work to do, more stress, of course.
Coming because you have this describing basically as a motivation for your work. That's the reason why I'm asking. Second motivation which you bring, introduction of the ED specialty.
Yeah.
How does it relate to your work? Because we are discussing quite in a few places as a motivation for need of the performance measures. So how your work help in understanding impact or relations between this new specialty which is introduced in Denmark? ED, specialty.
It's being advocated many places now. Emergency medicine as a specialty. Just take this just to briefly explain what it is. A physician which specializes in emergency medicine is an all-round physician who knows a lot of different conditions that has to do with the acute patient. And with such a physician, the theory is that you're better able to see what treatment services needs to be provided. If specialty treatment is to be provided, send them to the right facilities. This is very important to send them to the right inpatient ward, because if you send them to the wrong ward, probably bounce, and then you lose a lot of time. Patient can get, condition get worse, so on and so forth.
So which aspect of the emergencies, introducing the emergency specialty, you help with?
Well, I help by measuring the effect of introducing this particular intervention. We see it as an intervention, really.
Just as specific as you can be.
Let's say that at a particular emergency department, you launch or you have physicians trained within emergency medicine to a particular date. In the control charts, you could mark that with a vertical line, saying this is where we do a change.
So you're introducing basically a new task for emergency clinician, for example, the new specialty, or they're replacing some clinicians, or
not as much a new task, more than that.
To utilize the capability.
Come again,
What
please.
is the role? I mean, your methods, what you develop right now in dissertation, how does it help? For example, if somebody comes and said, I would like to see basically what we should do.
It helps you document the effect of launching this change in the system. It doesn't provide you any solutions on what to do. It only shows that the change is either significant or it doesn't have an effect.
There's still background questions, yeah? Coming back, you mentioned that since, okay, I talk about the emergency, new specialty, your role, meaning your contribution, but next question is, you mentioned very elaborate in few places about the significant changes, organizational changes, which need to be done, or which is happening. What changes are you talking? And again, what's the relation between these changes, which is coming from your motivation for your work, with your model which you're developing? So how do you help? How to narrow down a scope, basically, and using your motivation for your work, basically, just going through some of the items. In relation
If I understand your question correctly, so I'm not talking about...
Okay. Let me rephrase it.
Okay.
So you are saying is that in motivation for your work, that there's a lot of radical, as you call it, radical changes, organizational changes, which will be happening right now. So my question is again, what's the relation between this motivation which you brought in your dissertation with the work which you have developed in terms of the model which you are presenting in this paper 1, 2, 3, and 4, or any other things which you have done?
Well, my ultimate goal has not changed at all throughout the whole PhD, which was to develop this measurement tool. So we see all these radical changes. We know when these were launched, but how does it impact the emergency department as a system? How can we measure that?
So you cannot help them to evaluate the changes they done it, or new specialties they introduce. You just assume it is given somehow, and you are focusing on other aspects. Is it correct understanding? Because you know what I'm saying. Let me see. If I'm a FAS guy, for example, let's say,
yeah.
I mean, person is doing it, and then there's a number of changes done.
Yeah.
Somebody need to evaluate it. How good they are. I need a model to evaluate it. Yeah.
That's
So
right.
it will be you or somebody else. Yeah. Potentially, for example, new emergency specialty coming. Yeah? You can say, well, this exists in the UK or in US. Fine, but it's different system, different country, different scenario. So you cannot take it arbitrary. Yeah. Or organizational changes, which are suggesting right now triage. Yeah, triage has advantages, but also a lot of disadvantages. Yeah, so right now, if let's say somebody CEO of hospital or in the country, let's say government, they need to know how good it works. Since you are talking about the FAM as the main motivation for your dissertation, so I try to understand which aspects of FAM concept you are addressing in your dissertation, the work which you have done. That's all a series of questions which I'm bringing right now. Okay, as a defense, you might say, well, I just did it because it's happening. However, my work does not include evaluation of anything related to FAM. Is it correct?
I try to make it as general as possible, really. So it's not confined to the FAM concept only. Of course, then you need to add measures or discard other measures. That would be dependent on the given emergency department.
Okay, so just take basically whatever was provided, and you do not do assessment or evaluations of any changes that is happening. Okay, makes sense. That's one option actually. Second question is, since you started very practical, and you mentioned about the stakeholders of all of this development. So you are still in the background side of the question. You are talking about these stakeholders who might be interested, or who do you address your dissertation to? And you mentioned as a first primary stakeholder academics.
Yeah. As I said in my presentation.
And this is a question mark to me. Why academics?
Why academics?
Yeah, you are addressing a very critical problem which is in the country, which is affecting the healthcare. And academics as a patient, I understand, no problem. But from problem point of view, let's say it should be, why don't you try to solve the problem which healthcare has it? You know, not.
I think my.
I'm trying to tweak this question a little bit just to provoke.
Yeah, it's fine. It's perfectly fine. It's supposed to. It's supposed to. Considering the entire PhD as a project, and for me as a PhD student, the main challenge really is to balance the practical contribution with a theoretical contribution also.
There's no contradiction between these two, by the way. There's no contradiction between these two.
Well, they pull in each in opposite directions, I'd claim.
So let me just put the hypothesis. If you solve practical problem in systematic way, and your systematic way to develop models is unique, novel, you have academic contributions. Or I have a different scenario. I don't have a problem at all to work on. And I still can have a systematic approach and modeling, which doesn't solve anything.
Yeah.
I still can have a very interesting research, potentially. There's no impact, of course.
Yeah, exactly.
But intellectually, it might be very interesting. Yeah, but I'm not solving anything.
No.
Since you are
Let me say that I'm in the first explanation you provided.
Sorry, which one?
The first one, like systematic approach, rigorous research, and practical usability.
So what's the problem?
What's the problem is you have tons of different initiatives going on
Okay.
in the emergency departments. And you don't know if you're improving, and if so,
Okay.
how much, and to what delay, and all that.
Okay, good. So from this point of view, moving along, what are your conclusions, let's say, to Dr. Jens Laursen, for example, sitting here? If he selects, great, we have so many performance measures, what do you tell him? What to do? Assume right now we have a work with Lisbeth, I believe, Lisbeth Ram, head of the emergency department. You have so if she come back and, well, sorry for putting question in your mouth. Let's assume right now, because I'm not a doctor, I'm wrong doctor. I'm not a medical doctor. So right now, if I come back, so what do you tell, for example, emergency department, what they can do with this right now, with the work? Yeah, they would like, assume right now they would like to use it. You tell them, I have a good performance measure of emergency department, as it is stated in your titles, in your dissertations. What is it? Can you tell me in a few sentences, 1 to 3 sentences, what is it what you're offering to them, to the customers somehow of your research?
I am offering an IT solution which can be used to assess these different initiatives that you have been launching for the past, say, decade at least. With this, you gain the understanding of how the initiatives work in a systematic way. All these performance measures that are included, all the experts claim that these are the ones to measure. We're no different, we should measure these too. If we measure these are linked to each other. So not only can you see the effects of the initiatives, you can also causally explain why you see the different behaviors. This is why you need my tool. We need to develop this further.
Have you convinced them or not? I'm not so sure, but let's say. But let me just follow up. So I'm trying to play around, devil advocate a little bit here, just to nail down. So right now, if I am in emergency department and I'm using perhaps a little bit UK and US style, I have a 4 hours, which means that from door to discharge, I have a 4 hours to discharge the patients or to admit the patients in ward, to specialty wards. And then in UK, they set it first 98%. No hospital is able to deliver it. Then they reduce to 95%. How they estimate it is probably, I talked with a few physicians, nobody knows exactly. Nice numbers, basically. They are contractual. In Denmark, they are not contractual, if I understand, but they might be contractual. So this is probably one of the major or one of the critical factors in emergency department. How do you address this in this work, which you have done it here?
You're talking about the length of stay.
No, length of stay is, well, you can call it length of stay.
When I say length of stay, I mean the length of the stay within the emergency department only.
Yes.
So it's the same, same measure. In those windows that I showed you, you could put a horizontal line marking the upper limit, the 4 hours.
Okay.
And you can actually control for this limit. So this becomes the...
Okay.
You can indicate very clearly that we're above this.
Okay, very good. Then they above, they know it. Yeah, I mean, I don't know Danish statistics, but in UK statistics are low. All hospitals, or not all, but majority, I would say, probably all actually, majority because they are brave guys who admit it. But most of them have struggled. So right now, if you look at this, probably you have seen the data looking at the admission for 4 hours. Yeah, basically, they are quite everything but normal. They are basically, if you have 4 hours, you have a double peaks, basically, bimodal double distributions. They are not normal, for sure. SPC, you are suggesting as a process, and you brought it, statistical process control. SPC, and you brought us even to history of Schuchard starting from 1930s. SPC is designed for, and you have a single variate type of model. SPC is designed for normal distribution, usually for ID data, independent, let's say, not correlated data. In healthcare, first, you don't have a normal data at all. At least I don't see basically from, for example, from the flow of discharge of the patient.
That's right.
Then you don't have independent data. They are correlated quite strongly because you're using pass analysis or SEM. So how do you want to use? And first, second, there's multivariate. So why are you suggesting single variate SPC, which has a problems because they do not use the single variate data? They are not normal, and they are not uncorrelated, they are correlated. So all of this violate simple basic use of SPC in classical way.
The honest answer is that I found no other way of visualizing data in such a way. I did make these probit plots. So if you have normal distributed data, these should be on a straight line, and it's of course a sigmoidal curve. So I agree, it's room for improvement here. I can't tell you which way I would prefer to present these data. I know they're correlated, otherwise I wouldn't connect them to each other.
You could use a path
Exactly.
analysis.
So it is a violation,
Yeah.
definitely.
So this is required quite different approach actually, because
Yeah.
starting from multivariate actually, and then looking, there's approaches to do it actually, because we are doing it actually, suggesting also a number of different levels, but definitely this chart which you show will not work.
No.
Just, yeah, that's one thing. Single variate X bar chart, which you show it here.
Suggestion would be to
How
use.
do you approach it? Can you
Yeah.
just- since you have it, yeah.
Now that you're just asking me, and I have to provide you with an answer straight up, right? Then
Remember, this is a discussion.
I would
forum.
probably use some more or less advanced charts, some run charts for starters.
Which one?
Run charts.
R chart?
You have control charts. You have run charts. Run charts is
No, conceptual is the same, just running it separately. One for setting up basically upper lower control levels, and second basically by using it. Yeah. So conceptual has the same chart, just only used for different purposes. One for designing the chart, second for running it for control. Okay.
I'm out of words here.
approaches.
Sorry
I'm
there.
not saying easy approaches, because the current SPC methods are really limited, especially from academic point of view, interesting problem. From hospital point of view, is a challenge for sure. No question about that. Actually, to do this, it's a problem. Very interesting, but only from academic point of view. From patient's point of view, if I'm a patient, I don't like it.
No.
If I'm a professor at university, I like it. If I'm in hospital, when I talk with the doctors, definitely they don't like it. Yeah, okay, so there's a control chart which you mentioned about some of the approaches. Then you mentioned some other approaches as well, let's say. And then my generic question is like this. You study different performance measure. So I use just 4 hours as example. But on your chart, which you did this, your paper number 1, which you brought it here as well, the most, let's say, significant chart, it was length of stay, just 4 hours, which we discussed. And then you have a number of indicators, for example, not being seen by doctor and so on, attendance and so on. None of them you are addressing somehow in your methods which you developed. Yeah, so you have a KPI in paper 1, which is suggesting which are most critical ones according to survey and discussion, and I assume. And then you are developing methodologies to model. And suddenly you switch from this KPIs, key performance indicator, targets, which you selected as the most important, you are ignoring them and developing methods, for example, for sickness, let's say patient satisfactions, which are somewhere on the list later on, but they are not addressing the most critical ones. Why not? What was the logic?
I referred to that in my presentation, saying that the studies were conducted in the US, in Canada, in Australia, these meta-studies at least.
Okay.
And they probably highlighted other more operational, they highlighted more operational measures and really neglected the whole employee-related side of it. If you use that in Denmark, you're missing a key aspect of the ED, which has to do with employee retention, employee well-being of being in a workplace that you actually prefer to work here.
Okay, so you need to be first to workplace first.
If you don't measure that at all, similar to saying that we don't care.
Fair.
When I was in the US, what I encountered was that they didn't measure employee satisfaction at all, because they took great pride in being at this particular location. So it was roughly put saying that if you don't want to be here, there's a door.
Yeah.
Therefore, you don't measure it.
So
But if it makes sense in a particular setting, it should be included. That's what we agreed upon in our team.
Fair statement, yes. Yes. Universe will be mostly looking at the customer side, which is patients first,
Yeah.
and then insurance companies because of fundings, financial issue, which is
Exactly,
also
yeah.
has a negative consequences, quite significant. Okay, good. Don't mention this in UK because I think UK lose all doctors. They don't also do this.
I know.
Okay, so that's good. What I will do maybe, I will stop for time being, and maybe if we can continue, and I'll come back a little bit to some other questions as well. Yeah. Don't want to take the whole time, and I'm just looking at the watch right now.
And I can maybe I can save you a little for
Please do.
in your brain a little, Michael. I have my presentation or my questions on the PowerPoint because I'm old. My brain is not working that quick any longer.
Det skal lige sætte.
Yeah, so if you take that up, and I can use this one.
Yeah, just hold on. If you give it to me, then I'll set it up.
I will start to present myself. I'm a doctor, a medical doctor. I'm an old orthopedic surgeon and shouldn't have anything with an emergency department to do. But I changed 2 years ago. But the time before that, I met Peter, and I was at a PhD here with Andreas Trabia, and I thought that was something very interesting, the way of measuring, because we are measured on everything. I think if I should be a leader of a department, now I know it's EM department, I've become that. I was earlier on an orthopedic department. I need some goals to go for, to see if it's a red light, if the goal is the yellow light, or is it's a green light. So that was the option to discuss, and I think that was where you came in. And we planned to do it in Sønderjylland, and that's why I have this presentation with the region South Denmark and Sønderjylland, but we missed it, and damned, because I think it would have been fantastic. We have not that many PhDs in that region, so it would have been very good to do. So that's why this is coming up. I was quite pissed off when you moved it, but so that's the game. So now you have the opportunity to change those angry smileys to glad smileys, and you have to answer some of the questions that maybe have been proposed to you, and I'll do some other because maybe will challenge you on something else. So you can change it to 5 smileys. Yeah. I hope you'll do that. You have talked a little of it, the idea, why measuring, and are we measuring too much, or what is it? And what is the topics from Andreas? That's Andreas. I don't know if he's here. No, but that you build on.
What Andreas did in his PhD was to look at
The imaging departments in at 4 hospitals in southern Jutland, and he provided the foundation for my project, really. What he did was to make his own performance management account, in which he took all the indicators that he found relevant, without really being that critical towards these, put them into this kind of a budget of sorts, and proposed this as his final framework.
Yeah.
Furthermore, he made what is called multiple criteria decision making in order to weigh these different indicators, compare them to each other, and assign weights, which of them are more important than others. This is kind of a subjective way of doing it. And then he left some open-ended questions, and I was looking hopefully around in the audience, could someone pick up on these questions? And I volunteered, so to speak. How it differs from Andreas' project?
That's good. That's okay.
Okay.
You get it. Yeah. Where did it start? Derek was asking, where did all this start? In the 80s, yes. But what is the latest main topic? Who is he? Do you know who he is? Anyone here know who this guy is that has come up with all this interesting stuff that we are dealing with today? Super sygehuse or super hospitals. Erik Juhl. Yes, you have mentioned him. Yeah. There was a very big group philosophy on what to do, how to address this with smaller, with bigger hospitals and a big hospital in each region. So that was the structure, and all of that came from NIP, or what?
Some
Yes?
of it did,
Yeah.
definitely, yeah.
Yeah.
The head of this NIP project, Jan Mainz, has been referred to in my report. The NIP is a national indicator project, and the reason why I couldn't just extract indicators from this particular project is that it has to do with disease. It's connected to diseases. So this would definitely be a point of departure in my continuous work.
Yeah, yeah. But NIP was some of the beginning, National Indicator Project. Can you live in some group of diseases?
This project ended in 2009, I think.
Yeah.
It's not like the project is completely dead, because the regional database of clinical risks, I can't recall
that's
the
quite
complete name. Those are placed at the different regions, even at hospital levels, I think.
Yeah.
They support data to these registers. And so it's actually live and kicking, this project still, just with a different name and different employees.
Yes, that's good. So that was two. And we did, that was what some of the process too, for those who can't read it, that's the National Indicator Project. There was a lot of other points that you address it, and then there was a good medical department of some of it. You look at psychiatrists, the surgeon regions, and you look at the general practitioners, and so on. And this was put into a new model, the Danish, or what is it called?
The quality model, the Danish quality model.
The Danske Kvalitetsmodel.
Kvalitetsmodel.
Yes. Yes. What's the next coming up? Because this is out. We have done a hell lot of paper on this Danske Kvalitetsmodel. So now when that's finished and it's put in paper, we have to do a new one. So it is. Yeah. So there is coming a new quality program.
I was about to say it would be changed.
Yes. Yeah. And who is that guy in the middle there? The old guy. Do you know who that is? He's a Greek.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can see that.
Petronius. Do you know him?
Nope.
No?
Sorry.
He said, we trained hard, but it seemed that every time we were beginning to form up into teams, we would be reorganized. I was to learn later in life that we tend to meet any new situation by reorganization, and a wonderful method it can be for creating the illusion of progress while producing confusion, inefficiency, and demoralizing. Yes? Was that the philosophic part of your thesis?
Hopefully not.
No.
No.
But that's what
On
we're
the
up
contrary,
against.
we were up against that one.
And it's very hard to measure and very difficult to measure. You have. So which analyses and equations to use? You use some. Why not these? What is the equation? Or part of? Now it's in Danish, but it's the relativity equation. Yes, everything is relative. Are you measuring that? Derek was asking a question about that.
It actually tells about the time delay.
Yeah.
If you're thinking about which analysis that I chose and why I did so,
Yeah, looking on events, times, between events. What is affecting it? Can you look at it and can you look at an event without not affecting it? No, may not. Or what are we missing? Yeah, everything should be made as simple as possible, but not simpler.
No.
Is that okay? Derek was asking you a little about the same. I don't know about those big equations and so on, but what I wanted was the red light, the yellow light, and the green light. Yes? Can you later on come up with that?
I hope so.
Yeah?
Of course. No.
You get it.
Okay, fair enough.
And the philosophic part, could we have learned something from these guys? We have mentioned one of them, Einstein, the other one.
Yeah, Niels
Who
Bohr.
is that? Yes.
Niels Bohr.
And what does he tell?
That he tells a lot of things, of course, but in terms of philosophy,
yes,
I think,
very good book.
Then remember something about like the God's eye looks upon reality from outside.
Yeah, who's God's eye? Who's God's eye in emergency departments and hospitals and so on? Who is that?
Yeah, I consider that too. Again, it depends on the perspective that you apply. Yeah. So there's no definite answer to that one.
That's what they're saying. Both Einstein and Bohr depends on the perspective. Yeah. An expert is a person who has made all the mistakes that can be made in a very narrow field. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
You don't need to agree with everything.
No.
We go back again. This was the introduction. I'll do the latest short. That was my questions. As a leader of department here, emergency department, it's mandatory to know what is happening in your department. That was your task to rule out. Quality, outcome, economy. Isn't that the three parts?
Roughly put, yes.
Yeah.
But of course, in order to understand these outcome parameters, you need to understand the processes in order for you to change it.
Yeah.
That's what I emphasize.
I have been in NIP for almost 15 years. We had process indicators, we had outcome indicators.
Yeah.
What do you think we ended up with?
Outcome indicators.
Yes, only. And there's only outcome indicators because we can't use the others. But they can be used in a process.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what you do.
So once again, the perspective, if you apply the top management perspective, then those are the ones that you
Good. Future leader qualifications. Is that worth measuring?
Of course it is.
Could be.
I wouldn't include it in this.
Future workers' qualifications?
Of course.
Yeah. Transformation of healthcare sectors, fewer and bigger fans. Is there a limit?
To how few you can?
How few and how big?
Of course there's a limit. I'd say one of the big problems is that patients now need to get transported for longer distances.
But in the FAM, in the ED, in the emergency department, is there a limit for beds? Is there a limit for how big?
Of course, there's a threshold limit for when quality deteriorates.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Where that limit is a very good question.
It's up in the, Fewer beds, increased elder burden. Can we solve it? I don't know. I wrote Access. That's a project we have been doing with the primary health care sector in South Jutland, where you in a cool disease you choose whether a treatment in hospital or out in the primary health sector, and we found out that it was a better health in the primary care.
Okay.
Yeah. So interesting.
So that's your recommendation?
Could be. It's we have talked about it. It's dangerous to go to hospital. Yeah, you die when you're there. No, but I'm joking.
Sorry, could we go one slide back?
Yeah.
Because I would like to use this to ask a related question to Christian. So when you, for instance, discuss the first 2 bullet points, fewer and bigger FAMs and fewer beds, can we use your tool? Jens Ole was sort of asking the more general question. I want to be sort of more specific. Could we use your tool in any way? Your tool is specific sort of for the clinical manager or whatever you would translate the Danish term klinikchef to into English. But can we use these settings are more strategic? They're more getting closer to politics. Maybe they're actually politics. But could we use your tool or any sort of extension of your tool in answering these questions instead of sort of the more general discussion you're having right now?
I'd claim you could, because I made it as flexible as possible, but that would imply that you change some of the measures according to a different perspective, and now being the top management that you refer to. So the same approach would apply. Not sure that you could apply. I wouldn't apply my performance measurement framework directly in this case.
So what do you mean by sort of by that you can use the same sort of structure or setup?
That you identify which measures are. You're talking about the third bullet point here.
I was thinking about sort of 1 and 2. Increased elder burden is probably something we cannot change.
No.
Unless we get drastical about it. But that's not the general discussion point here. But fewer and bigger FAMs is something we could actually discuss. I mean, we as, let's say this was the regional council, we could discuss it, and we could actually sort of dismiss Jens Ole, and he could sit in the corner and say whatever he wants to from medical reason. We could, as a politician, say we want 1 in our region. Yeah. So then I think, then my question is, can we use your setup in order to identify whether this is a good idea or whether this is a bad idea?
I would perform a completely different analysis in this this case.
Yeah.
Because now we're talking about pros and cons of having 1 large facility compared to more. So my answer is no.
But in your tool, what you do is you have these upper limits and lower limits, and if we reach them, something goes wrong. I mean, then we are in a, am I right in understanding? Then we are at a critical level. That's sort of the Boston case. Then we sort of...
There are some threshold limits, that's right. You think about the trigger values.
Yeah. Couldn't I do the same for a case with 1 FAM and 2 FAM and 3 FAMs here? How often do I hit the threshold, or for how long time do I hit the threshold, or whatever you sort of...
If I was to deal with this question right now, then I might just use another simulation model, try to model the entire patient flow once more, and then simulate a closure of other hospitals so that the inflow increases, and thereby determining what should be the what's the requirements for such a fund, and then use that as a foundation to estimate how large should it be, how much staff should be employed.
But your studies would be based on the same data foundation that you already got from this project. No?
There will probably be new numbers.
What's that?
There will probably be other numbers saying you're suggesting 1 large. Yeah, 2 large ones. You have to estimate it's called the caption as a caption area, or how many patients are coming to this hospital, coming through this emergency department, and then size it accordingly.
I think Jesper is provoking you to go to the area which you have not done anything, and the model will not work.
No.
Remember, in the beginning, you're working from door only, not outside. That we discussed earlier. And then what we are discussing right now is interaction between the hospital, which is actually talking about the primary care, actually, strategy, accessibility, and so on, which is a problem by itself, which is completely different logic, which he's doing. He's doing just within the hospital.
But I don't. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I actually also just want to stay within the hospital, but I want to sort of lift this tool from an operation level to.
I'm trying to help him, because if he start answer yes, then you get a whole bunch of questions here coming his way.
No. I'm done here. Jens Ole can continue. I just wanted to see whether we could lift this tool from sort of.
To the normalness, that's what we are against. You were talking about it, and that's an issue, and your work on sickness awareness and jumping out of your job and so on, that really means something. It costs, education of a nurse in a FAM costs 1 million Danish kroners. So you have to take care of them. So that I think it's okay to look at that. Service waiting time, is that equivalent with treatment?
Not in isolation, definitely not.
No?
It has something to say, that's of course right. But you should include more measures, as I have done, to say something about at least the quality and efficiency.
Yeah. And how to create flow. You have been talking about that.
How to create flow?
Yeah.
Sure, you understand.
Patient flow.
Patient flow. Yeah.
Yeah. How to create it?
Yeah. You talked about flow and stock and so on. How to create flow.
That's okay.
Can we measure that?
Well, my proposition was to use simulation models.
Yeah. And can you measure it in your model?
In that particular model, simulation model,
Yeah.
yes, you can.
Good.
Not my final purpose.
IT, you have mentioned it too, and that's mandatory. We haven't got the same tools. We haven't got the right tools. There are 5 different regions, and we have different IT systems, different journals, different X-rays, and some have Citrea, and some have some other things, and it's so difficult to get united data. So that's a problem.
Yeah.
Is it all IT based, or is it warm hands? What's best? You know what warm hands is?
No.
No,
I don't.
You don't know. Warm hands is the working people. IT is what you use.
Okay, then I understand.
Yeah.
Should be a mixture of both.
Yeah.
In my report, I use this, or I refer to Jay Forrester's funnel, which claim or specifically states the value of different information sources, whereas the numerical one is the smallest in diameter, whereas the real value is where the warm hands.
Yeah.
This is where to find the true understanding of
What do you
definitely
think
of,
patients prefer?
of course, not IT,
Yeah.
but yeah.
We have had a hierarchical organization through centuries. Can that be changed to an efficient flowing organization throughout different medical theses and specialties?
Yeah.
And can we
So-
use your model in a new hierarchical model, leading model?
I'd say this is a poisonous question, Jens Ole, because the different departments are currently working in isolation. It's specialty based. And in order for us to knock down these walls, this would mean a not just radical, but very radical change in how to think healthcare. It should be, maybe we should prefer to go the team-based, according to what patient presents with symptoms, and combine a team of physicians, nurses, technicians, so it's tailored for this particular patient. That would be, I claim, the optimum solution. To go from where we are to this scenario would be a change in culture.
Yeah.
And that's never easy.
I think it's Peter's next PhD thesis.
Yeah.
Addressing some of these issues. It will be very interesting. There are some of your papers, we have seen that, I won't deal with that. Only one question to paper 3. Why not deal with all the regions? You are dealing only with the capital region. I know
Right.
that's
My
where it
limitation-
snows. I have all my children in Copenhagen, so
Yeah.
they say it's here it snows. But there are other regions.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course it is.
Why not
This,
do the benchmarking
this particular
against them?
report that I use was the first of its kind.
Yeah.
It included only patients from the emergency department, and this was the case. This was only done in the capital region.
Okay.
I claim that I generalize and say that patients in Copenhagen are not that very different from Okay,
Okay.
maybe they are, I'm
Yeah.
not sure. But in time, if we have more reports, you can do a similar analysis.
And paper 4, then you went to Boston. Oh, it must be fantastic to go to Boston. Could you have gone to the other side? Could you have gone to Sweden and made the job there?
Yes, I could.
Yeah?
Yes, I could.
Would it have been more correct to do that?
Correct in which?
Yeah, are we more like the Swedish model, or is it too different?
Now, the reason for going to Boston was that they had already launched this concept of farm in their setting. They are considered as being top performers. So I took the opportunity, really.
That's okay. I would have done the same. Yeah. We have talked about that, the philosophic way and Niels Bohr, and that's you're following postdoc. You have been talking about that, and that would be very interesting. Time to treat and pay off. That's really what we will discuss the next years in Danish healthcare, isn't it? Yeah.
It would be, yeah.
Yeah. Management and emergency. A new system. You haven't mentioned that much about the acute packages. Do you know what it is?
Yeah.
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 What is it?
Well, at least in your region, Southern Jutland, then they're called standardized time-controlled
STP. Yes.
STP. Yeah. Standard time patient.
Yeah.
Procedures.
Procedures. Yes.
That's right. Got it right.
Very good.
Excellent. Those are especially meant for patients presenting themselves with given symptoms. That's when you launch a pack of different tests, treatment services, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
I said to myself in the future research, this is definitely an option to include measures here.
Okay. You have mentioned Q theory. Whale time. What's that?
Which
I don't
one?
know if you have
Whale
that
time?
theory. Whale time. If you're
What did
working
he
with that.
mention? Did he mention queuing?
No, I haven't.
When the biggest over time, if you take from 2 o'clock till 20 in the evening, that's the most patients are coming into the FAM or the emergency department. Whale time, you have the hump of the whale. Yes. Can you put that into your equation and take account of that?
Then you're changing the scope a bit by doing so.
Yeah.
I took this into account in my simulation model because that definitely has an impact on the. Yeah, it doesn't have a sine wave patient.
But you have the impact.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So different project though.
Yeah. Yes, can we see development backwards? Can you make your model going more backwards?
It is based on historical data, of course, and I have to warn about making the time window too large, because then you include too many numbers.
Yeah.
Of course, now that Derek told about the SPC windows and the faulty conclusions that you may draw, that would definitely be the case if you increase the time window. However, it is based on historical data.
So you can.
One more warning is that these initiatives that are being launched in the emergency department to measure the effect of those is also difficult because they are launched in parallel. And if they do that, then I cannot distinguish between which effect has done what in the system. So it's difficult.
Yeah.
Hopefully, it's not impossible.
Yeah. Okay. So that was the summary. You will get it a little later. Some of it is in bullseye, I think. So, could be mine. I think we're up to 5 now of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
Changed it. I'll give it over to
Thank you. Yes, what will you? Here or there?
I'll stay here. There is this, where sickness absence. So your argument is that we're in a Nordic country and we put emphasis, maybe even we're in a European country, we put emphasis on employment, on the well-being of our employees, and therefore you look at sickness absence. One thing I was thinking about when you sort of initially discuss setting up some kind of performance indicators, the reasoning is we need to, even if we can come up with a lot, we need to focus on a few, because otherwise, I mean, it's a mess. We cannot really control what we are actually looking at when we see the different values. But you do not mention anywhere that we absolutely have to go down to 1. So why does it have to be? What's that?
To one indicator only?
Yeah.
If you do that, then first of all, which indicator would that be?
Yeah, no, but why do you only look at sickness absence in that?
That has to do with the with looking at all the generative mechanisms. If you or refer to this philosophical angle, then each individual indicator, you can go down in depth in any of these. And this was an example exactly of this, trying to set this causal framework.
Okay. So I could do more than sickness absence.
What more?
Yeah, what more?
If I could have chosen something else, or
yeah,
I could,
yeah, something.
Of course.
Wouldn't it be good to have something that complements sickness absence? So you have, for instance, this on figure 5.2, and also it's also later in the thesis. You have these different parameters or measurements. Yeah, measurements that you picked up from literature. So wouldn't it be sort of in the general setting better to take maybe sickness absence and combine it with some of these others, or add some of these others?
Could have, but then it would have been more time consuming. I don't think that I would have come this far if I had done this maneuver.
Okay. Would it have been a better decision support tool or a better performance analysis tool if we've added more of these? Would there be a sort of positive cost benefit?
It would be more complete. You would gain more insight. So yes, it would. But keeping in mind the statistical test that I applied, and it wasn't strong enough. So I should probably have used a different technique.
Is the data there for? So is the data there? The data, is that there for performing some of these other, for including more measures?
If the data is there to include more measures, I'm not.
Yeah. I guess you need, in order to survey sickness absence or use that, then you need to have data.
That's right.
So if you need to include length of stay or arrival clinical assessment or unintended incidents.
Yeah, see, now it becomes difficult because then you need to link each and every patient to, not patients, but for employees and length of stay, how is that even possible? Because, let's see.
But I think sickness, you're talking about the staff. Not
Yeah,
the patient.
that's mixing. Of course, this is the ultimate goal of my performance measure, just to link the different constructs, both internally but also externally.
Okay.
I have to consider that question, Jesper.
Okay. Going back to your tool, to your Excel spreadsheet, if you want to put a version number on it, where are we at the current stage? Is this 0.1 or 0.9 or? How
It's
close
a
are you?
0.1. There's
Okay,
no,
0.
there's
Okay.
no extensions, not yet.
Okay.
They will come. So,
Yeah. So what is missing?
more thorough analysis of the magnitude and time delays. As Derek mentioned, the SPC window is another way of showing these, graphically presenting these data and to distinguish between what has had an effect and what has not had an effect.
Okay.
Should preferably automate how this data is, first of all, that kind of things. But also it should provide a pinpointer to explain the behavior more than just listing all the possibilities.
Okay.
See?
Yes, Ole wants something on the wall that says whether it's going good or not going good, and then based on that he'll
Yeah.
make a quick decision.
I'd like to supply, there was one arrow, like data trend arrow.
Yeah.
And that's because I had more data than just 1 month for this particular indicator. So I could use an index number that, correlates or compares the data development. Preferably, it should have that for each and every indicator.
Okay.
So definitely version 0.1.
If I can just interject one question.
Yeah.
If I was in hospital, I would prefer to really have the one good index, which is kind of, because these indices, key performance indicators, they are related to each other. So there are some of them are more important, some of them are less important, some of them are contradictory to each other even. And then if you satisfy one, for example in stroke, you have a few actually, which is, or they are not targets are not driving to outcomes. I can bypass it if I want to satisfy index without improvement outcome overall. That's also possible. So there is a lot of different indices, which some of them actually are probably could be better. Let's stop on that. But from this point of view, they are related to each other. So which one is the most primary one to use it, for example, to really improve, beyond the cost, of course, to really improve basically the performance, whatever you measure it, of A&D, ED?
Yeah. Again, that depends on the user. I know it's a defensive answer.
If you are, for example, running the AD department, you are expert on performance measure indicators, yeah? You did 3 years of study, just performance measure indicators. You know that there is a lot of correlation between them. Yeah. So right now, if you need to look at the most fundamental one, which, because of the correlation between them, if I improve one, if I understand which one is most critical one, I will have also impact on the other ones in the same time, kind of. So but I don't need to necessarily worry about 20 of them. So what would be the most primary fundamental ones? According to you, not user.
No, okay.
If you are running.
If I was to analyze that one, then I would have to do some work beforehand. That work would consist in mapping the web or the interrelatedness between all these indicators. And the one that appears most strong, one that connects everything, the one in the middle of the spider web, that's the one I would choose.
Which one is it?
Beats me. I don't know.
From your expertise, you did 3 years performance measure, just performance measure.
The one that is
so I would say
mentioned many times.
No, but I don't think somebody else mentioned it because
no. What I mean is when I did the interviews, it always related to this particular measure. But that was the patient load. It explains a lot of the behavior.
Okay. If you do interviews, how do you know that they are right? All of them might be wrong. Why? Because they're used to the same measure. I'm not saying that they're wrong, but I'm saying people are used to, for 20 times I'm repeating one word, then I don't understand it, but I still think that that's it. But I don't know what I'm talking about it, for example. I'm just exaggerating this information. Since unless somebody really studies, if not, they have experience. But experience can be very dangerous, because experience leading to repetitions. Repetitions might not necessarily solving anything, or might be completely fundamental principle incorrect. So interviews are dangerous. It's good to know, but you cannot live on them, stop on them. Their opinions, basically.
It's an assumption. I try to do as many interviews as possible with staff from each of all.
But from your models, you did a lot of data analysis. You developed the models. So if you put aside the opinions from your expertise based on the data-driven approaches which you have done it, without experience in terms of, which is a good part, I'm taking as advantage, because you are not biased, basically. What do you see? Or did you see anything?
It's too complex, Derek. I cannot provide you with that one answer. I would like to, but there's no one measure that covers everything. Sorry, but you need to consider all of the measures.
Did you ask these questions to your...
Yeah, either Lisbeth or Jakob would probably provide you with a...
So what answer did you get?
What answer they would provide me?
Yes.
Often the same.
But did you ask? You did interviews, yes? I mean, interviews, I understand. That
Yes,
you
I
asked.
did ask, but I didn't ask for one measure that covers them all.
So which one is
Because
most
I
popular?
find that to be an impossible question to ask.
So which one is the most popular one? Sorry for pesting on this topic, but
Yeah.
I think sometimes there's too many indicators which I'm observing, and we have a data supporting it that if I want to play around...
To my experience, it would still be the patient load.
Patient
Because that
load.
Patient load, the incoming patients.
Number of patients.
Number of patients you come through, because that really determines workload, how to schedule things. It's kind of an operational...
But this is something which they cannot control at all. People are coming, that's it.
No, they
don't
can
have
control for that one, that's true.
They cannot do anything about it. So they simply basically are telling them,
Yeah.
hope
You can
for the
prepare
best.
yourself for
Yeah.
it.
So which index, I'm talking about the performance measure,
Mm.
which is helpful for improving performance, yeah? Inflow, is given,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, based on the structure or based on the policies which are created. And layout of hospitals, sorry, not layout of hospitals, distribution of hospitals.
I understand your question.
Okay.
I just...
Okay, sure, yes.
I didn't ask either Lisbeth or Jacob this particular question. We agreed upon a set of performance measures that were essential to assess the performance.
Which one is number one in your...
Yeah,
There's a simple
it's the
answer.
same question.
You have it, yeah?
So we just agreed we couldn't find
We
one.
cannot find this
Perfect.
one. Like,
I was waiting for this. Great, great.
we cannot find this one.
You cannot use one because the government will shut you down. If it is public, yeah? Or insurance company if it is in USA.
Yes, but have you...
No, I have no more questions. That's okay.
Okay. Have the committee for?
Yep, that's right.
Then we have maybe other people with interest in that. There are time for that.
Christian, you have opportunity to ask questions.
Okay.
No, I just had my question
Especially
answered.
this one.
I have no further questions or anything to add.
But one quick question, actually. I think you mentioned about the expert definition, yeah, saying that, using, I think Niels Bohr, expert. I thought originally, I think we have a discussion with your previous colleague, I think, Pelle or Andres.
Yeah.
I thought that expert is a person who knows more and more about less and less, finally knows everything about nothing. Yeah, is it?
Or confused at a higher level.
That's almost what it says.
Many definitions, that's right.
Also, one more comment, I just comment. You mentioned garbage in, garbage out. Not necessarily true, in my opinion. Because you have a data which will have a limitation, doesn't matter how IT system will be improved. So here, the whole holy grail is how to make from garbage in a decompost out, not a garbage out. Something useful. Because you will not change, I don't know exactly in Denmark, but in US, in UK. In UK, they spend £3 billion for IT system. And if you ask some of the, let's say, CEO in the hospital, they think that they wasted the money. Just almost, if they are frank, almost plain. Why? Because IT was developed by engineers, IT people, who has no idea how hospital works. Doctors, they don't know what they want. They know what they would like to have effect, but they don't know what they want. But they are the people who are preparing the specs. And then you have a systems which is cumbersome as can be. For example, let's say dealing with the data, we have a data doesn't talk to the database. How many databases do you have in your hospital which you work with? Total.
From the performance measures that are included, there are some 5 different databases.
Are you sure? I am almost positive that if you go to this 2 or 3 hospitals, you will get a different number of databases. I'm even more positive that if you ask 3 doctors in Boston Hospital, you will get 3 numbers for the same hospital. They do not know it, how many they have it. And then what's happening, if I need emergency data and I'm working on the stroke, which is a separate database, and I need some correlations, what they do? They ask third company, potentially, to merge for them. So they are sending out, merge 24 hours later, they're getting back. They are patching the problems, and you have so many layers of data patched in a number of different ways that it's very difficult to figure out what's going on with them. Yeah, so IT system right now is really a very interesting problem, but it's not a complex, it's complicated. So from this point of view, actually, I wanted to ask you about databases, but I stop here. Because this will be a topic by itself, actually, next 1 hour discussing about your data.
Shall we say that we have finished? And thank the Christian and the committee and all people, especially people who have not said anything. I think we'll go outside and the committee will stay here.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.